In this first example, we're going to measure consumer attitudes toward a hypothetical store, just generically named Store X. These 4 questions represent what you might see on a survey that would be administered to customers or prospective customers to obtain their attitudes for the multi-attribute attitude model. So these are questions about the consumer's evaluations of favorableness or unfavorableness of each salient attribute. So the attributes are wide selection, low price, high quality, and convenient location. And so this is a typical format. This is called a semantic differential, where you have opposite pairs of descriptors, such as bad, good, could be favorable, unfavorable, for the evaluation of each attitude attribute. So you see that each question says, I feel, I feel, I feel. So this is the consumer's evaluation of how good or bad the attribute is. And as a reminder, this is the Fishbein multi-attribute attitude model formula in its simplified form. So we are obtaining the E in this particular instance, which is the evaluation of each salient attribute. Now, continuing with our example, measuring attitudes towards Store X, we are now going to capture the beliefs component of the multi-attribute attitude model. And so here you see some questions that would appear on a survey to obtain consumers' beliefs about these salient attributes. Again, these are the same 4 attributes we saw earlier: wide selection, low prices, high quality, convenient location. But now, instead of asking them how good or bad they are, the questions are about how unlikely or likely is it that the store has each of the following qualities. Now, the evaluations come from the previous set of questions, and now from this set of questions we have the belief strength. And please note that the scale that is used to translate this into numbers ranges from -3 to +3. So this would be a -3 right here, -2, -1. This would be a +3, +2, +1. So again, we see our simplified Fishbein multi-attribute model formula down below. So this set of questions obtains the B component. And as the formula shows, we're going to multiply these together. So we're going to multiply for each attribute the belief and the evaluation. And then we're going to sum the products together to obtain the attitude toward the object, in this case, Store X. This slide summarizes the information that we've obtained from the little survey that consumers filled out. And so here we have the list of attributes. This is the evaluation. So this would just be, this could be the average evaluation across, let's say, 10 people who filled out the survey. And this would be the belief strength, that the likelihood that this store has this particular attribute. And in a moment we'll be involving the competing stores, because what use is it to know our attitude if we don't know how people feel about the competition? And so applying this formula, we would compute the attitude score by multiplying the evaluation times the belief for the first attribute, wide selection, and then the same thing for the second attribute, low price, for the third attribute, high quality, and for the last attribute, convenient location. And so we have these products right here. So 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times -1 is -3, -3 here, +4 here. And then we add those together, and what you get at the end result is a +2, which sounds okay, right? It's positive. So how can we use this information to diagnose whether the attitudes toward this store are competitive or not, whether there's a competitive advantage? Well, this is where we now bring in data regarding consumers' attitudes towards store Y and store Z. And again, using the multi-attribute model, we're going to be going attribute by attribute, not just using a general attitude of the stores. So the first step is compare our overall attitude score with the scores of the competition. Now, to do this, we need to realize that the evaluation ratings for the different attributes, wide selection, low prices, high quality, those are the same. So regardless of which store we're evaluating, consumers still feel the same way about the attribute itself. So the evaluation ratings are constant across all the attitude objects, which are the stores in this case. However, the belief ratings for the salient attributes change for each attitude object because a given person might feel differently about whether store X has a particular attribute versus store Y and store Z. So this is the only thing that's going to change in our computation of the attitude is the belief, but the evaluations, we will use the same evaluation scores for all the stores, but for each store we must use its belief rating for the salient attributes that that particular store possesses. So here we have all the information summarized. This is the evaluations of the attributes, just one column. And then we have a separate column for the belief ratings for each store for the different attributes. And so here we see again the computation for store X, which we did earlier. Here's the computation for store Y. So now it's starting to come into context what our score of a 2 means, right? So store Y scored a 21 and store Z scored a 16. And as a reminder, this is the formula. You should definitely commit it to memory. So how do we use this information to diagnose the attitudes toward our particular store? Well, we've compared overall attitude scores with the competition. We can also compare our brand to the best possible score. So by comparing to the competition, we see that we're definitely below the other 2 stores. So how about in relation to the highest possible score? In order to compute the best possible score, you keep the evaluation constant and you maximize the belief strength. So it would be a +3 for positively evaluated beliefs or a -3 for negatively evaluated beliefs. Because if it's a attribute that consumers don't like, then you want your brand to be perceived to have as little of that as possible. But if it's an attribute consumers do like, then you want them to perceive that your brand has as much of it as possible. Now there's a shortcut which applies when you're using a scale from -3 to +3 to measure the attribute beliefs and evaluations. And in order to maximize this score, to get the perfect score, given the current evaluation, so we're going to use the favorableness evaluations that consumers have given us in the survey. And so what you do is you multiply +3 times the sum of the absolute value of each evaluation score. All right, so again, you're going to use the absolute value of the evaluation scores. You're going to add those together and multiply times 3. And that will give you the perfect score as a benchmark from which to compare your attitude score, the attitude toward your particular store or brand or product, whatever it is that you're diagnosing. On this slide, we see the computation for the perfect score given this set of evaluation scores for each attitude attribute. And so as you can see, I've taken the absolute value. That means that we disregard the negative sign. We just treat everything as a positive value. And so I've added these together, multiplied times 3, and that gives an overall perfect attitude score, an ideal attitude score of 24. And so again, that provides another benchmark, the fact that we need to make some adjustments in order to improve our standing, not only in terms of a perfect score, but as we saw earlier, relative to our competition. In just a moment, we'll talk about how you can change consumers' attitudes toward your particular product or brand or store. Now we're going to talk about how to identify salient versus determinant attributes. And this is important because this plays a role in identifying which attributes to focus on to change in order to improve consumer attitudes toward your brand. So here we have a set of information about consumers' evaluations and beliefs about a set of brands. Attribute A, B, C, and D. So which attributes are salient? Well, the scores give us information about which attributes are salient. Salient attributes are important evaluation scores. And how do we know they're important? Because they are non-zero scores. It can be negative or positive to be salient. But if it has a score of 0, then that means the person is indifferent about that particular attribute, so it is not really salient to them. Now, which attributes are determinant? And the term determinant means it's an attribute that distinguishes the consumer's attitude towards brand A versus B versus C. It must be an attribute that is salient, meaning that the evaluation score is non-zero, and that the belief scores are different for each brand. Okay, so if we look up here, we can see that we have one non-salient attribute, right? So that's C. So already this cannot be determinant because determinant attributes must be salient. So this right here is ruled out. So we would not bother with trying to change how consumers feel or believe about this particular attribute because it is not salient. Then we would look at the beliefs, the belief ratings, to see of the 3 remaining attributes that are salient, which is A, B, and D, which ones have different belief scores, belief ratings for each brand. So you can see up here that although this is a very strongly evaluated attribute, it makes no distinguishing difference in their attitude toward brand A, B, or C. This one right here has different attribute ratings for 2 of the brands, but not all of them. Over here, this one does have different scores for each brand. So this would be a determinant attribute. Again, because there's different scores for each brand. We're not just looking for, 2 brands are different, but 2 are alike. We want different scores for each brand. That's going to be the best bet to focus our resources, our marketing budget on trying to change in order to influence consumer attitudes toward our brand.